This army doesn't eat. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't get scared. Daenerys sees a thing with her own eyes and gives Jaime the number, at least 100,000. And when those soldiers kill your soldiers, the Night King can stand your dead back up on his side. Somehow, this army loses. That sounds less like a war and more like somebody left the cheat menu open. The living have to feed an army, rest it, pay it, keep it brave, and replace whatever gets killed. The dead can skip almost all of that. So start with the simplest advantage. They don't need lunch. A living army is a giant hungry camp that happens to carry weapons. Every day means more grain, more water, more fires, more wagons, and more tired men. More chances appear for something boring to ruin your invasion. Soldiers get cold, horses need feed, men get sick, people desert. Panic spread, and suddenly a disciplined army stops looking disciplined at all. A commander can lose an army before the enemy even does anything impressive. The dead have none of those problems. No breakfast, no bedrolls, no paymaster, no homesick soldier deciding he has suddenly remembered an urgent appointment 3 kingdoms away. They can keep moving without the food, rest, and pay a living army requires. Burn the granary? They do not care. Poison the well? Good luck. Wait for winter? They are basically bringing winter with them. That matters because most armies are not defeated only by swords. They are defeated by all the annoying human things that happen between the sword fights. A living host has to carry its stomach with it. The bigger it becomes, the more wagons it needs, and the longer its food line becomes. That gives the enemy more things to steal, burn, block, or simply wait for. Even winning creates work. Take a town, and now somebody has to guard it. March farther, and every meal has to travel farther too. The army of the dead gets to delete most of that part of war. It can arrive with what looks like an enormous army and almost none of the enormous support system that normally follows one. And then it gets an advantage that is even more ridiculous. Your casualties can become their recruits. In a normal battle, one of your soldiers dies, and your side has one fewer soldier. Very sad, very straightforward. Here, one of your soldiers dies, and there is a real chance he gets back up facing the wrong direction. It is not automatic. The dead still have to be raised. But we watch the Night King do exactly that, repeatedly, including while a battle is still happening. Hardhome gives us the first ugly version. Roughly 5,000 free folk agree to leave by ship. Then the dead arrive, before everyone can get out. Many people are killed in the attack before the evacuation can finish. The people escaping by boat watch the Night King walk onto the shore and raise the bodies behind him. The scene is horrifying for an obvious reason, but it is also a ridiculous military transaction. Jon has just spent the entire episode convincing people to become future allies. The Night King gets his recruiting speech down to one arm movement. We do not have an exact count for how many of those dead were raised, but the basic transaction is clear. The living lose people, and the dead can gain bodies. A massacre does not merely damage the enemy. It can increase the size of the force that performs the next massacre. Quick note, this is the TV version. The books? Night's King is a completely different legend. Winterfell makes the trick worse, because now it happens during the battle itself. Jon is trying to reach the Night King. When the Night King turns and raises his arms, the defenders who have already died in the fighting rise again around him. People who were on your side minutes ago are suddenly another wave coming at you. Think about how unfair that is from the living side. You paid for the armor. You found the horse. You trained the man. You fed him all the way north. You convinced him to stand in front of an undead giant. Then he dies, and the other side gets the finished product for free. That is an absurd rule for a war. The Night King does not need a training camp behind his army. He can turn your battlefield into one. And the castle has an even dumber surprise, waiting underground. The civilians are sent to the crypts, because the crypts sound safe, thick stone, underground, away from the battle. There is only one tiny design problem. A crypt is where you keep dead people. When the dead can be raised, the safest room in Winterfell is basically a room pre-stocked with enemy reinforcements. Which leads to the next problem. You cannot simply wait this army out. Normally, a siege is miserable for both sides. The people inside count food. The people outside count food. Everyone watches the weather and hopes the other group becomes hungry first. Time itself is a weapon. A castle does not always need to beat the army outside. Sometimes it just needs to be more annoying than the army is patient. The besiegers burn through grain, firewood, animals, money, and men while accomplishing the heroic military task of sitting in mud. The defenders are miserable too, but at least the walls force both sides to play the same waiting game. A castle can survive because the army outside eventually has to eat, sleep, treat sickness, and keep watch. Convince thousands of people that another cold week outside is still a wonderful idea. The dead do not have a calendar problem. If you hide behind a wall for a week, they are still there. A month, still there. Your grain pile gets smaller. Your firewood gets smaller. And your people get colder while the dead simply wait. The number of exhausted people asking how long this is going to last gets larger. Outside, nothing important has changed. The dead do not need a fresh camp, a pay chest, or a wagon train arriving before breakfast. Their food budget remains impressively close to zero. The longer the situation continues, the living side is the only side paying for the privilege. Waiting for them to get bored is also unlikely to help, because boredom requires a functioning personality. And hiding is not automatically better, because Winterfell already showed the joke. If the place you hide contains corpses, you may have brought the enemy indoors for them. Against a normal army, a crypt is shelter. Against this army, it is storage. Then Winterfell gives us the funniest advantage of all. The Night King does not even have to care about his own soldiers. The defenders light a trench around the castle. It works. The whites stop at the flames. For a normal commander, this is the point where you look for another route, because your soldiers are people, and people generally object to being used as fire extinguishers. The Night King has a different solution. He sends whites into the flames. They burn. More go in, then more. Bodies pile up until sections of the fire are smothered, and the rest of the army crosses over the dead ones. This is the sort of plan that sounds like a joke until you remember the soldiers involved are already corpses. A normal commander sees a burning trench and looks for another way around. The Night King just throws soldiers into it until the trench stops being on fire. The obstacle works exactly as designed. It kills the soldiers touching it. The problem is that the attacker does not consider that a meaningful downside. Try giving that order to a living army. Soldier 1 watches Soldier 2 burn, and Soldier 3 watches both of them burn. Somewhere around Soldier number 4, the plan starts receiving negative feedback. The dead do not give feedback. They are not brave. They do not need to be brave, because fear is not part of the equation. They are disposable in a way no living army can be. So now put the whole thing together. At least 100,000 soldiers, no food problem, no sleep problem, no fear problem. Your dead can become their reinforcements. Waiting costs you more than it costs them. And if a wall of fire gets inconvenient, they can literally pay for the solution in corpses. At that point, win in a week starts sounding a lot less ridiculous. Now for the obvious objection. The dead do have weaknesses, and they are real weaknesses. Fire can destroy whites. Dragonglass and Valyrian steel can kill White Walkers, and dragonglass works on whites too. The living also have dragons, which can erase huge patches of the dead very quickly. Jon's side is not walking into the battle with ordinary steel and positive thinking. They know several things that work. So this is not an invincible army, and pretending otherwise would make the whole argument cheap. If the dead had no counter at all, there would not be much of a video here. The interesting part is what the living have to assemble just to make the fight possible. But notice how strange the shopping list has become. Jon has to convince Daenerys to let him mine dragonstone for dragonglass. The useful Valyrian steel weapons are rare heirlooms that happen to be in the hands of a few important people. Then add 2 living dragons at Winterfell, which are weapons so absurdly powerful that most other armies in the story would surrender at the sight of them. Against the dead, all of that becomes the minimum equipment for a fighting chance. And even the dragons do not solve everything. Daenerys blasts the Night King directly with Drogon's fire at Winterfell. It looks, for a moment, like the simplest possible ending. Then the flames clear, and he is still standing there. One dragon has already been killed beyond the wall and raised as part of the dead army. Is a fairly spectacular example of the recruitment problem getting out of hand. At Winterfell, the living take brutal losses, even with their special weapons in play. Those weapons absolutely matter. Without them, the fight is much worse. But none of them simply switch the enemy off. Burning whites removes whites. Killing individual White Walkers removes threats around them. The army still keeps coming. The thing that finally ends the war is much stranger. One blade reaches one man. Arya drives a Valyrian steel dagger into the Night King. He shatters. Then every other White Walker shatters. Every white drops. The undead Viserion collapses too, falling dead for the final time. An army Daenerys had counted at 100,000 or more disappears in the same moment its commander does. That is the joke hiding underneath the whole invasion. The army of the dead ignores food, sleep, fear, waiting, ordinary replacement problems, and even the normal value of its own soldiers. The bigger the living battle becomes, the more bodies may become available to raise. The longer the living wait, the more supplies the living consume. Even a successful obstacle can be solved by treating soldiers as building material. It is built like somebody sat down with every boring weakness an army could have and crossed them out, one by one, until almost nothing normal was left to exploit. And then they connected the entire thing to one off switch.